journey into the book of Genesis has led us through a couple turns, when the road is actually straight. And it was inevitable that we would end up at the subject of the serpent in the garden. And the last couple of episodes touching on this subject and highlighting the nature of this character, and the Bible using as a figurative illustration to represent what that serpent is, worm. The serpent is a worm of the earth, not literal, but this is a characterization. This is how you should think of this character. They are nothing but a worm. They're nothing but a worm of the earth. And then moving on from that worm, seeing that the association to worm is to man, and then the association of worm, man, to sons of men, and then seeing that this serpent character, this isn't a literal serpent in the garden. This is a role. Just as the figure Adam is a role, just as every character from Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is a role, the serpent is no different. This is a recurring role. This is a recurring role. A recurring role of one member of the sons of men, putting forth a particular light of understanding to sweep away the intended host of the Creator. But how can we make further sense of that? And that's what we're going to be doing here. How does this relate to justification? Maybe it doesn't, or maybe it does. Because we're going to look at this serpent character a little bit more in depth, and we're going to actually get the identity of this character. And the only way to do that, the best way to do that, is to look at the setting that we are in plain language. The setting that we are in plain language. And the setting we are in is that there was a serpent in that garden. Now, there needs to be a bit of a separation here because the garden was planted in a location called Eden. Eden is not the name of the garden. The garden was within Eden and planted. Looking at Genesis 2 in chapter 8. Genesis 2 in chapter 8 reads, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden." Eden exists as a territory. Eden is not that garden. That garden is not Eden. Eden does not belong to the one planting that garden within it. And how can we say so? This is a recurring theme of how the Lord God, the all capital Lord God, works throughout the Bible. And it's pointing to Exodus 3 and verse 8. Looking at Exodus 3 and verse 8, "And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of the land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites." What we have here is the same reproduced scene in Genesis, in Exodus. That garden was planted in a land or a territory of milk and honey. Now, this isn't literal milk. This isn't literal honey. This is Bible language to talk about the wealth and how plush a land is. Using figurative language of milk and honey here. Again, that's not literal milk. This isn't literal honey. This is language referencing how plush, how fertile, how economic, how philosophical, how spiritual, how devotional a land is, and at its center, to be a means to lead not just the people that are in it, but the entire world for what is within it. That's what the land of Canaan was. And in the land of Canaan, which was an Eden, was planted Israel, which was as a garden. And we've gone through the illustrations before in the Bible, where the Bible calls Israel the Lord's garden. I'm not going to review that here, but it's the same story. The same planting that has taken place within Eden for that garden is the same planting that is taking place within Canaan concerning the host of Israel. Now, to really get where this is going, We have to be able to understand how the Bible is viewing Eden here in the same language that's used. As the garden was planted in Eden, Bible uses the same language for Israel being planted in Canaan. To the Bible's mind, Eden is Canaan. Canaan is Eden. These are the same characters. Eden is a recurring territory. Eden is a recurring territory where a recurring garden of a recurring Lord is situated and planted. Now we have to think, what happens in this story to the individual garden that's planted? What happened as Israel was finding itself planted in the land amongst the Canaanites? As that garden is planted in the land of Eden amongst the Edenites, what happened? Looking at Numbers 22, 3 through 5. Numbers 22, 3 through 6, Numbers 22, 3 through 6. Moab was sore afraid of the people Israel, because they were many. Moab was distressed because of the children of Israel. And Moab said unto the elders of Midian, Now shall this company lick up all that are round about us, as the ox licks up the grass of the field. And Balak the son of Zippor was king of the Moabites at that time. He sent messengers therefore unto Balaam the son of Beor to Pethor, which is by the river of the land of the children of his people, to call him and to say, Listen, there's a people come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the earth, and they are against me continually. I pray you, come to me and curse this people for me, for they are too mighty for me. Peradventure I shall prevail, that we may smite them, and that I may drive them out of the land. For I would not that he whom thou blessed is blessed, and he whom thou cursed is cursed. Now notice this. When you find Israel in its planting situation, it was planted. What next arises? And just to get this thought of them being planted, looking at Exodus 15:17. Exodus 15:17 reads, Thou shalt bring them in and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established. So this language, even though I have been saying it without quoting it, I just quoted this same language of, and he planted the man in the garden. This is the same language found in Exodus 15:17. Thou shalt bring them in and plant them. Same language. It's the same language because it's the same scene. It's the same scene. And in this scene of planting, when they are finding themselves situated amongst the Edenites or amongst the Canaanites, the one thing that next happens when they are found flourishing, as is seen in Numbers 22, 3 through 6, via the king of Moab, when they are found flourishing, the one thing that is wanting, is for them to be swept out of the land. And in order for them to be swept out of the land, who is called? The serpent. Not really. Because the role of the serpent, if we're going to use history within the Bible to explain the Bible, the role of the serpent is fulfilled by this character called Balaam. That this character called Balaam is a false prophet. A false prophet that introduces Israel to false manners of worship and devotion, and to false thoughts about their own deity, to where they are sacrificing to the idols and to the gods and to the everything else because of this one prophet. He is sent into the garden to sweep away the host, and because of their flourishing state.
Many people find comfort in following religious practices, believing that these actions will bring them closer to spiritual fulfillment. However, it is important to question whether these rituals are truly meaningful or if they simply create an illusion of connection with the Bible. Religion often emphasizes the importance of performing certain deeds and acts as a way to demonstrate devotion and earn favor from a higher power. These can include attending religious services, participating in specific ceremonies, or adhering to a set of moral guidelines. While these actions may provide a sense of structure and community, they can also become empty rituals devoid of true spiritual significance. Similarly, traditions within religions can be deeply ingrained and passed down through generations. These traditions may involve specific customs, rituals, or practices that are believed to hold sacred value. However, it is essential to critically examine whether these traditions genuinely contribute to personal growth and spiritual enlightenment, or if they merely perpetuate outdated beliefs and cultural norms. The Bible is not just a religious text, it is a timeless source of personal and devotional inspiration and enlightenment. Its words have the power to transcend cultural and historical boundaries, speaking directly to the human experience and offering profound insights into the nature of existence. Through the Bible, we can uncover universal truths that resonate with our inward person. It provides a roadmap for navigating life's challenges, offering guidance on morality, purpose, philosophy, and personal growth. Moreover, the Bible encourages us to cultivate a personal relationship with it. It invites us to seek a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the natural and the religious world, fostering a connection that goes beyond mere rituals and traditions. By embracing the wisdom of the Bible, we can find true spiritual fulfillment that transcends the illusions created by religion. It empowers us to live authentically, guided by principles of mindfulness, empathy, philosophy, and forgiveness.
And so that's absolutely fascinating because just of the context. The context of this character, when you crunch it down and you realize that, sure, you have a figure here that is appearing to be a minister of light. You have a figure here that is appearing to be a voice of some sort of reason that is contrary to the reason that is within the quote-unquote garden. Crunch that title down, serpent. You have a shining figure. Shining meaning, as is in the book of John, reference to John, a mighty prophet. Just as we've been reviewing from our previous meetings. But to attack it from the point of the Bible, as in the Bible saying or linking this term serpent to worm, as it does. And it does so not based on its physical attributes, but this is analogy. The serpent to the Bible's mind isn't a literal serpent, is a character. Worm to the Bible's mind in that context, as we view it, isn't a literal worm as in the ground. It's a character. When we are seeing that serpent in the garden, we ought to think of it as a worm of the earth. And I don't know about you, but growing up and hearing like certain things, like when you're little or you're seeing things on TV, an insult that you can call someone is you can call them a worm. Even to this day, there are individuals that I'm sure you can point out that are nothing but worms. It is in that context that the Bible highlights the serpent. And I went through that analogy of seeing how the Bible moves from serpent to worm to man to sons of men, from sons of men to shepherd, because going right back down that line, the serpent is a shepherd worm. The serpent of the garden is a shepherd worm, meaning there is no pure light within this individual character. This is not an individual character. Again, this is a recurring role. Or should I say, now that we have this identity here of Balaam, this Balaam, because in the garden that serpent is figuratively a Balaam. This Balaam is nothing but a worm, we would say in modern sense. He's He's giving forth and putting forth a speech to disrupt the philosophy of the garden, to make that philosophy therein move away and the minds therein depart from the level of consciousness that is within that garden. And we've gone through the illustrations again. This is not a literal garden. Everything here is a figurative, recurring illustration. And when we find a particular garden at the center of a particular Eden, there will always be a particular serpent to disrupt and to sweep away that particular garden at the center of that particular Eden. We went through the illustration of Revelation. We went through all of these different illustrations just for this one point of showing that at a point in time, while Genesis does not make this known, the scheme of Genesis is throughout the entire Bible. We can find all of the Bible in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is the entire Bible. And through every illustration after Genesis 1, 2, and 3, we can always locate an Exodus. We can always locate the planting of a garden. We can always locate a serpent figure entering in and sweeping away. Because this is a recurring theme that the author of the book of Genesis is writing. Again, these are not isolated or solitary characters. Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is a recurring scene. And these recurring scenes have characters and roles to be filled. Genesis 3 opens with the role of that serpent played by one who is hired to overthrow or to offset the garden at the center of the Edenites or the Canaanites. And so how does all of that fit in to justification? It was only a matter of time going through Genesis 1, seeing the image of God, seeing what male and what female is, seeing the recurring system therein, and then moving on to Genesis 2 and then to Genesis 3. All of these elements combine, and the author writing the book of Genesis 1, 2, and 3 has a philosophical take or a philosophical approach on how their reader, or should I say, on how their student should be observing the things that are going on within their devotional well-being and also within the religious world. Author of the book of Genesis wants their student, wants their observer to know that the religious world has patterns. And the pattern of the religious world is Exodus from male and female combined, or should I say Exodus from the image of God to a regeneration for a specific planting of a host at the center of an Eden, only to have a hired figure sweep away or attempt to sweep away the garden that was planted therein. And this is how the Bible works. You think about Israel at the center of the Canaanites. You think about Abraham at the center of the Egyptians. You think about, this is a recurring theme throughout the scriptures. The all capital Lord, God, does not leave his host without being at the center of an uncultured or a quote-unquote uncircumcised. I'm speaking devotionally uncultured according to the philosophy therein. At the center of such a people, you will never find the chosen garden of the mind of the scriptures not at the center of an individual, group, assembly, host, territory that is contrary. At the center will always be that specific garden that has gotten there via an Exodus. And so I spent time, and I found it completely necessary to spend time looking at what is unwritten between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, because what is unwritten there is written in the book of Exodus, which is an Exodus. Looking at the figurative illustration of Genesis 1, bleeding into the figurative illustration of Genesis 2, how the creation of one is not the creation, how the creation of Genesis chapter 1, it is not the creation of Genesis chapter 2, yet both creations of chapter 1 and chapter 2, they both begin with scenes of chaos and emptiness. This is allowing us to know that Exodus is taking place, especially that gap between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. All of this allows us to put things into perspective concerning what that Exodus is and concerning the Eden in question. Coming up out of that Eden and being planted. Or should I say, coming up out of Egypt and being planted in Canaan. It's the same story, where you have a regenerated host, and we saw that this term Adam does not mean isolated literal man. Adam means group of kind of man. We went through all of that, just as in the Exodus. These are recurring scenes for recurring principles to show a recurring philosophical take and approach on how we should be observing the things that we would hold to be biblical, and also the things that we would hold particular to our devotional conversation. It is our responsibility to see what is going on within the Bible and to take full accountability for how we're handling ourselves. Because everything aside, illustration aside, the philosophy aside, the one thing that matters and ultimately matters, especially to the mind that is inspiring these words within the Bible, is our mental health. And when I say our, I'm primarily or firstly meaning the mental health of our personal devotional conversation, and that just trickles down to the being of our human.
Our faith is alive. Our belief is a living structure. But what does it mean to have a working faith? What does it mean to have a belief assisting our thoughts and feelings? A Faith That Works is a book informing its reader on how to cultivate an active faith. We usually have to make our faith work. We usually need to do something in order for us to feel like our faith is alive. Is this the right way to handle our devotional experience? Find correct guidance and instruction on how to carry the body of your faith in A Faith That Works.
And so I thought it would be interesting and very fun, because I've been touching on this subject of the serpent, which is attached to the subject of male, female, Genesis, creation, and all of that. And you can't really get into all of that without touching on that serpent figure. And so using only the Bible here, that serpent figure, not a literal serpent, but a role. And the role therein is a role of a character that is hired to overthrow or to offset that garden. Now, when you line up the history of the Exodus with the Exodus that is going on from Genesis 1 and 2, you arrive at the same scene. You arrive at the same scene. You arrive at the same Balaam on cue, doing what he does best, on cue, hired to overthrow via false doctrine and fake news about a particular scheme within that garden's philosophy. Subtly turning that philosophy upside down and inside out to have that host question the mind that gave it or the mind that inspired it. And in so doing, latching on to its general philosophy. Now we have to remember that this Balaam figure, Balaam in general, serpent figure, does not honor the mind within the garden. The all capital Lord, God, is not what this serpent or Balaam honors. Balaam honors the image of God. So remember, as we went through Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth. Then you get to Genesis 2, it says these are the generations of which the Lord God created. Genesis chapter 1 is devoted to a creation of just God only. And not just God only, there is another one there creating alongside. Genesis 2, the regeneration of Adam is not by God, it is by the Lord God. Structurally, these are two different figures. Structurally, these are two different creations. Structurally, the serpent is an agent for God. Confusing, right? So when you're seeing that the serpent is an agent for God, why would you not listen? Because you, in whatever realm you're in, you love God. So the serpent is for God. But in that sort of innocence, we're not realizing that the God that the serpent is for is the God of Genesis 1. Servant to the image of God, not the Lord God of Genesis 2. The Lord God of Genesis 2 does not idolize the image of God. We can understand this from the regeneration of Adam, which is contrary to that image. And so going through and looking at the philosophical implications of what the image of God is and does and means to the Adam of Genesis 2, and the response therein of that regeneration to such a creation by that image, it is interesting to see that serpent figure then arise with a philosophy condoning the behavior of the image of God, yet not condoning a mindset of the Lord God of the garden. Because we have to remember that this garden is in the midst or in the center of Eden. And Eden, despite whatever traditional thought we want to have, Eden does not know the Lord God of that garden. That's very plain. Just as the Canaanites did not know the Lord God of Israel. Same story. It's the same story. And that serpent is an agent, and specifically an hired agent, for what is outside of that garden, although being familiar with what is inside of that garden. And so when we're seeing that agent at work, yes, this Balaam, this is a prophet, sure. Balaam was a prophet. This Balaam is a prophet of all kind of things. But in reality, Balaam is a prophet of no real light at all. The only light that Balaam has is the light of what is outside of the Lord God's garden. And when it comes to justification, distinguishing between the two, making sure that we are not a part of that cult or clique of Balaam and being persuaded just because he is a follower of God. We have to know that, sure, let that be Balaam, but there is also a Lord God of a particular garden, or should I say a philosophy of a particular garden that really doesn't mesh with the Balaam in question.